Welcome, everyone, and thank you for coming to the 2021 Klinsky Lecture. I'm delighted to introduce John Palfrey as our 2021 Stephen and Maureen Klinsky Professor of Practice for Leadership and Progress. Before introducing Professor Palfrey, let me take a moment to recognize Stephen and Maureen Klinsky, who are here today, and to say a few words about the Klinsky Professorship. So Steve holds both a JD and MBA from Harvard. He's the founder and CEO of the private equity firm New Mountain Capital. He's entrepreneurial both in his, entrepreneurship and his philanthropy. He's taken on the longstanding, deeply problematic issue of the cost of education by founding Modern States, a nonprofit alliance that provides for a dazzling array of top-flight online courses that enable students to build college credits under the college level examination program. Maureen is a graduate of Cornell University. After 12 years on Wall Street, where she became a managing director at Bear Stearns, Maureen went on to earn her MFA at Columbia University, and she's now a best-selling novelist under the name Maureen Sherry. In 2013, Steve and Maureen established the Stephen and Maureen Klinsky Professorship of Practice for Leadership and Progress, the first professorship of practice at the law school. The idea of this professorship is to bring people to HLS who have accomplished great things in a wide variety of professions beyond law, people who have shown their ability to take impactful, practical, and ethical actions to make significant positive impact on the world around them. Thanks to Steve and Maureen, we get to invite these folks to Harvard Law School to teach and inspire us and to broaden our perspectives. Past Klinsky professors have included Cardinal Timothy Dolan, former Representative Jane Harman, founding director of the Broad Institute, Eric Lander, and Mandy DiFilippo of Morgan Stanley. And in a moment, it'll be my great honor to introduce the latest Klinsky professor, John Palfrey, the president of the MacArthur Foundation. I want to thank Steve and Maureen for their enduring commitment to educating great lawyers and leaders. And please join me in a round of virtual applause for their wonderful generosity. I'd now like to invite Steve to say a few words.
Not working. All right. Just anything. Let's get the voice. All right. Hey, good. I hope everybody can hear and see me. Thanks so much, Dean Manning. I'm here with Maureen. All I want to say is, first of all, thanks for admitting me to the law school many years ago. It was a surprise. I've always been continually grateful to that. When they used to send out letters to the thick letter, it changed my life, and I couldn't be more thrilled about it. Dean Minow, former Dean Minow's on this call, and I want to thank her for having the vision to start the professorship, and to thank Dean Manning and Steve Oliver and all the team for doing such a great job of continuing it. I'm particularly interested in hearing Professor Palfrey. Everything I know about him is exceptional, back to his links to Teddy Roosevelt and his family and everything he's done for freedom and information access, which are issues that Maureen and I have a lot of passion about. So thank you, and we look forward to the lecture, and thanks for including us today.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you again, Maureen. I'd now like to introduce our newest Klinsky professor. John Palfrey is president of the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation and a trustee of the John S. and James L. Knight Foundation. In addition to earning degrees from Harvard College and HLS and the University of Cambridge, John served here as the Henry N. S. III Professor of Law and as our Vice Dean for Library and Information Resources. He was also Executive Director of the Berkman Klein Center for Internet and Society. In 2012, he left to become head of school at Phillips Academy, Andover, where he served until 2019. John's the author, co-author, or editor of 10 books. He's written extensively on internet law, intellectual property, diversity, campus intellectual climate, and the potential of new technologies to strengthen democracies locally and around the world. He is also the founding president of the board of directors of the Digital Public Library of America. And while he was vice dean here, John, along with our colleague Jonathan Zittrain, was one of the moving forces behind the effort to digitize the resources of the Harvard Law School Library, the largest law library in the world, and to make them available to lawyers, researchers, and students across the globe. Today, John will bring his experience and perspectives to a topic that is urgent for our times, our law school, and educators and students everywhere: technology and the public interest, teaching and learning in the time of COVID-19. So please join me in welcoming our 2021 Stephen and Maureen Klinsky Professor, John Palfrey. John?
Dean Manning, thank you so much for your kind introduction and for the opportunity to serve as the Klinsky Visiting Professor of Practice for Leadership and Progress in this auspicious year. I can't tell you how great it has been to be back with the Harvard Law School community, and in some ways, given our topic, it's fitting that it's virtual, although it would be more fun to be with you all in 02138. Thank you too to Stephen and Maureen Klinsky for being with us today, for those wonderful remarks at the outset and reminding us why you did this and why you do this in the context of your philanthropy, for your exceptional generosity to our shared alma mater. I cherish this appointment and the chance to be the 2021 Klinsky Visiting Professor. It's been a thrill and I'm truly grateful to you. Thank you too to Catherine Cronin in the Dean's Office, Stephen Oliveira and the team in the Development Office, Urs Gasser and all those in the Berkman Klein Center who have helped to sponsor and put on this event today. And thank you too to Professor Martha Minow, who will close us out today and who had the vision, as the Klinskys said, when she was herself the Dean, to imagine this gift, and I suspect to shape both this professorship and the lecture series. Finally, thanks to all of you who have joined us and will participate today. I am touched by the turnout over Zoom. This is fabulous. In particular, I'd like to thank Isabella at Berkley, Madeleine Matsui, and Jess Valenzuela Ramirez, all members of the Harvard Law School class of 2023, and students in the course that I taught this winter term, entitled Technology and the Public Interest. Isabella, Madeleine, and Jess will be the initial respondents after my remarks this afternoon. I'm honored by their presence and willingness to serve in this role, and you will be in for a treat in hearing from them, as I was all winter term. We've learned many things, all of us, in this past year plus of the COVID-19 pandemic. One of many lessons has to do with Zoom itself. We're all familiar with the, oh, sorry, you're on mute. I hope I'm not right now, actually. That would be awkward. And the challenges of Zoom fatigue. We've also learned that no one wants to listen to anyone other than the very best lecturer talk for an hour straight on Zoom. I am far from one of the very best lecturers, and I will spare you even a half hour straight. The game plan here is that I'll give more of a sprint than a marathon type lecture, then turn it over to the students to respond, then open up to questions and comments from the larger community. We'll end with Professor Minow, who will likely pose a question to the students and perhaps one to me, and then close us out. My story today is framed by three key dates, each separated by 20 years: 1981, 2001, and 2021. 40 years ago, in 1981, Stephen Klinsky graduated from the Harvard Law School. We are fortunate indeed that he did, or likely we would not be gathered here today. Stephen, we're glad you got that thick envelope, and that I hope you enjoy your 40th reunion this year. 20 years ago, 2001 was my class year at Harvard Law School. I will linger here not to center myself in the story, but to ground us in the heady days of what we then called the internet boom. You may recall, if you were around, that Professor Charlie Nesson taught a class called The Exploding Internet. Jonathan Zittrain, fondly known as Jay-Z, taught early versions of his famous Internet and Society, the Technologies and Politics of Control. I had the great good fortune to be one of his research assistants and TFs, and among the early students at the Berkman Center for Internet and Society, alongside a dynamic, passionate, zany crew who gathered around what Miles Berkman called the water cooler for a new era. The spirit of the times in 2001 was electric and exciting. It was also dominated by a point of view that the internet was a new thing, a new space, cyberspace, and something that deserved to be treated differently than everything else that had come before. For many, this point of view translated into a hands-off regulatory environment for the internet and everything associated with it. There was even a name for it, cyber libertarianism. It had some appealing features, to be sure: a radical openness and a sense of possibility, the lure of a new kind of more participatory and global politics, and, to be sure, great riches for those able to harness it. The United States Congress and those in the regulatory agencies and judiciary at the time more or less went along with this orthodoxy. In this country, at least, regulation of the internet was kept at a bare minimum. No new major dedicated regulatory agencies or regimes cropped up, except at the margins and when absolutely necessary. The idea was that innovation in this new space was so promising that we should not risk stifling it, not just through excessive regulation, but really through much regulation at all. The emerging e-commerce powerhouses, for instance, even managed to keep taxes on sales over the internet at bay for a while. The effect of this hands-off approach to regulation of the internet did exactly what it was meant to do. Witness Amazon today. It resulted in an historic boom in businesses dedicated to the internet, social media, data, hardware, software, hosting, cloud computing, artificial intelligence, machine learning, and on and on. At least off the bat, the vast majority of these companies were founded in the United States. While countries like China have given rise to worthy competitors in many fields, the United States remains the undisputed leader in virtually all aspects of the internet, digital media, and computing early in this new millennium. And it made a small number of people, mostly men, mostly highly educated, mostly white and Asian, fabulously wealthy, more so than at any point in history, perhaps with the exception of the 19th century's Gilded Age. Warning signs emerged quickly in the ensuing years. Not everyone was enamored of a totally hands-off policy for the internet, digital media, and data-heavy technology industries. Scholars from around the world pointed out the dangers and shortcomings of the United States policy regime. European states and the European Commission itself broke sharply with the United States, though created bridges through safe harbors to allow European citizens to use the US-based services. Authoritarian regimes, including Iran and North Korea, for instance, sought to create their own balkanized versions of the internet. China erected its Great Firewall and an elaborate regulatory regime long on state investment and involvement, short on protections for individual speech and privacy rights. Scholars, too, question the wisdom of this cyber libertarianism. Harvard Law School and Berkman Center, now Berkman Klein scholars, too numerous to mention all by name, deserve citation here for sure, as do many who work elsewhere. Jay-Z, for instance, wrote The Future of the Internet and How to Stop It in 2008. Susan Crawford left a partnership at WilmerHale to join the Legal Academy, calling attention to the captive audience, the telecom industry, and monopoly power in the new Gilded Age. Ruth Okediji, Terry Fisher, Lawrence Lessig, and many others pointed out the dangers of an intellectual property regime that favors only some at the expense of the public interest. Yochai Benkler and a team of researchers have exposed the role of political and media elites in spreading dis and misinformation on social media platforms. Urs Gasser pointed us to the extraordinary array of scholarship and practice outside the United States, in the process creating a network of centers that spans more than 100 institutions and connects with and holds up to the distinctive thinking of those on nearly every continent. I could go on, but that would take too long. You get the idea. And now to 2021. In early January, an intrepid group of about 70 Harvard Law School students met over Zoom for an intensive 2 weeks together to study these issues in the present day. You can probably imagine where this story is headed. It was only a few days into the course that a mob stormed the United States Capitol, seeking to put a stop to the full and fair election that was to bring Joe Biden and Kamala Harris to the White House. Smack in the middle of our class, a group of largely white people took up arms against our country's congressional leadership in an effort to stop the certification of the election of the first African-American and first Asian-American woman to one of the highest federal offices. While this insurrection mattered to everyone, it had special meaning in the context of our course. We threw out the carefully planned syllabus for a few days to talk about what the insurrection meant to us as people devoted to the study and the practice of law and as human beings. These terrifying events unfolding in front of us held out the chance to talk about race, power, injustice, and social class, among many other things. It was a time of high emotion disproportionately felt by some members of our class and our society. Specific to our course, these unsettling events in early January also afforded us the chance to talk in real time about the decisions that policymakers and company owners had to make. For starters, should Twitter take down the tweets of the then president that urged on these insurrectionists and ban him while still in office from further communications to his millions of followers on the platform? People who are in charge of Facebook, Twitter, and other social media sites had to decide whether to exercise an unprecedented amount of power. Through this Harvard Law School class, and thanks to the Klinskys, we had the chance to debate this very choice, just as it was happening. We heard also from a guest to the course, Peter Curry, who served until recently as the lead independent director of Twitter, about the nature of the decision facing Jack Dorsey at Twitter, Mark Zuckerberg at Facebook, and their colleagues. We studied the lack of access to broadband while school had moved to Zoom, just as our own Harvard Law School students' experience had gone entirely online for this year. We discussed what it meant for 1 in 5 students in Chicago not to have access to broadband and sufficient computing equipment to participate in school at all once it had gone virtual early in the pandemic. We debated the merits of universal broadband access and other means of closing the gaps in access to our digital network in an era in which health information, access to justice, and access to an education itself hangs in the balance. We had a chance to debate these topics alongside Nicole Turner-Lee of the Brookings Institution, who has made the case for universal broadband access for decades, and with Sal Khan, who visited our class and told us about his aspiration to make a world-class education available for free to everyone, anywhere. As an aside, as you know, the Klinskys too are helping to make a high-quality, low-cost college-level education possible through the internet, through many of their philanthropic efforts. We had the chance to debate the question with which I started, whether the internet should be subject to greater regulation than it has been for over 20 years. In the midst of what is now called the great deplatforming, as in fact the social networks did ban the former president, we took up the big picture question of whether the United States-led cyber libertarian regime is in fact the right one for 2021. We heard our guest, Jamil Jaffer, Harvard Law School graduate and director of the Knight Institute, describe the complex interplay between the protections of the First Amendment and the rights of the private platforms to decide who can publish what online. And we heard from Spencer Overton, Harvard Law School graduate and director of the Joint Center, about what technology policy has to do with voting rights for people of color and others from marginalized communities. Today, in 2021, each of these issues is on the table for consideration by the Biden-Harris administration, the United States Congress, and the federal judiciary. The best way to regulate social media and the algorithms that increasingly assist humans in making essential decisions, the possible reform of the Communications Decency Act, Section 230, the call for universal broadband access, each of these issues that we had a chance to debate are live considerations for legal and policy reform here in the United States and indeed around the world. I did not during the class say all that much about my own point of view on these matters, and I admit this is sort of my style. I take the position that students are best served by working out their own ideas to the greatest extent possible in the context of a course without being steered too hard by their teachers. I note a few of them have joined us today from the participant list, and I'm very excited to see them with us. That said, if the students cared to know my personal views, what law scholars might call my normative priors, my guess is that the students worked much of it out by following the breadcrumbs I left as they set up the syllabus, chose the readings, invited the guests, and moderated the conversations. But I'll conclude these remarks today by lifting the curtain on my own perspectives a bit. My view is that the 2001 era absence of regulation does not make sense today, if ever it did. The cyber libertarian approach favored people one would expect it to, individuals who already had power and capital, a group overwhelmingly white and male, and in this case, often Asian too. The venture capitalists and technologists, the big firm lawyers, and the Wall Street bankers with the technological aptitude and bent. The system has been much less good for just about everyone else. We need a regulatory regime today for technology that puts the public interest first, with equity and inclusion as a design principle and not an afterthought. Of the current debates that we took up in the course, I believe that access to broadband should be treated just as we treat electricity or the telephone system. It is far past the time that we can think of this system as anything other than an essential utility. The problems of the last mile in rural areas or the yawning gaps in cities like Chicago, where I live today, need to be solved in a hurry after years of foot dragging. The COVID-19 experience bears this out and leaves it plain in front of us. I agree with those who believe that the social media companies had every right, perhaps an obligation, to deplatform the former president and others who are spreading misinformation about a properly conducted election and much else besides. I do not think the First Amendment does or should stand in their way. I share the worries, though, about the power we are leaving in the hands of a very small group of billionaires, all who happen to be men and white. I worry a lot about the fate of our country's journalism and media sector in an era dominated by gigantic and ever more powerful social media companies. And that is a lecture for another day. Perhaps most controversially, I agree it is time that we amend Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act. This key provision of United States internet law is considered sacrosanct by many in the technology field, and it is the cornerstone of the cyber libertarian philosophy. This provision, written into law in 1996 as part of a massive overhaul of the telecommunications regime, was meant to promote good Samaritanship by those running emerging internet platforms. It has a funny dynamic to it. On the one hand, it ensures that the platform providers are not held liable for the bad acts of their users. On the other, it is meant to give them protection if they choose to act as a good Samaritans to offer a helping hand. It is true that this extremely wide and deep safe harbor has led to the growth of internet companies, to robust competition, and to much innovation. It's also led to many bad acts and to many companies turning the other way when law enforcement or aggrieved parties come calling. In the name of preserving their safe harbor, many companies have done far too little to protect those who have been harmed. It is time, I believe, that the law should be amended to extend meaningful protection to all, not just some. Urs Gasser and I made such an argument when we wrote Born Digital, a book which came out in 2008 in the interests of child protection. I agree too with the arguments put forward by Danielle Citron, a 2019 MacArthur Fellow, incidentally, and Mary Ann Franks about individuals who are too often harmed by this absence of a regulatory regime, mostly women and people of color. I even might be persuaded to agree with a brilliant legal scholar who happens to be here today, who recently suggested in a seminar I attended that Section 230 should not be amended, but needed to be scrapped altogether and for us to start again. We'll see. I believe it's time to create new digital institutions in the public interest. Ethan Zuckerman has called this digital public infrastructure. In Ethan Z's view, which takes off from Newton Minow's work in the 1960s, we should treat digital infrastructure as public goods, not purely as profit maximizing enterprises. I agree. I think of the Digital Public Library of America, a Berkman created project, which offers a public option when it comes to access to digital materials and ebooks, or Wikipedia as extant examples, with much more to be built and built out. Imagine too a cloud computing system that is not held in private hands, or at least for profit, a social network that truly protects personal information, digital media platforms that transform news and information the way NPR and PBS transformed the landscape for radio and television, and so forth. It is time, in my view, for us to reimagine the knowledge and information needs in a democracy before it is too late, and to build the institutions to meet those needs. Across education, journalism, libraries, we should imagine and build new digital infrastructure for the public good. This is the progress and leadership I'd love to see in our field. Most important of all, I believe it is time for a new, dynamic, more diverse, inspired group of young people to join the field of technology and the public interest. I have every confidence, especially having taught this class, that these newcomers will help to build the new digital institutions and will serve the many, not just the few. I'm excited to see what they will do to design, build, regulate, and remake structures in a system that badly needs it, in the interest of a more just and inclusive economy and our very democracy. Thank you. Now let us please turn to the best part of this lecture. I put quote marks around lecture, a chance to hear from three students who, I hope, may be among those who decide to take up these issues in their professional lives one way or another. No pressure. Each of these students made their mark in our star-crossed and possibly timed course this January. For those not currently in the Harvard Law School community, this course was part of the January experiential term. Over Zoom, it is hard to make something truly experiential, so we improvised, as we've all improvised in nearly every aspect of life this past year. We talked about matters of doctrine and policy as a through line to the course, but it was really about what it means to become a lawyer, the kinds of things our students can go on to think about and do after law school. In addition to bringing guests in from inside and outside the legal profession, we required students to write a self-reflection on whether their application essay to HLS still made sense to them, required them to solve a technology policy problem in a team, and do all of this online. To help us understand this story from the student perspective, I'm pleased to introduce three exceptional people, and I hope they will turn on their mics and their videos. Isabella Berkley, Madeleine Matsui, and Jess Valenzuela Ramirez. I've asked them each to comment as they see fit on my lecture, on the substance of the course, and on their experience as Zoom-only 1Ls this year. I've invited them to be candid, to share whatever they feel is important to know, even if it may contradict what I've said or throw shade on the course or the experience they've had so far in law school. I'm eager to hear what they have to say, no matter what, about this intersection of technology in the public interest and the experience of learning the law entirely via the technology of Zoom. Isabella, if you would, please take us away.
Thank you, Professor Palfrey, for your thoughtful words and a very engaging winter course. So there's a lot to unpack with what you just said, but I will focus my comments on access to education as things have moved online, which you have mentioned does hang in the balance. After our course, I spent some time reflecting on the past year as a virtual 1L and as someone very interested in technology, and identified two main questions related to access to virtual education. So the first is, do I have logistic access to the literal technology that will help me thrive as a student? So this can be a computer, monitor, or a chair that won't break my back after sitting in it for a year during virtual learning. And the first question is hard because, as many of us have previously discussed, it involves taking stock of different starting points and trying to equalize the playing field. Harvard did this via a tech grant, the efficacy of which has been discussed at length, so I won't go into it here. But some might need more ongoing support or a larger initial input of financial capital. Thinking creatively here would also include grants for other resources offered on campus that might not be available virtually, such as a health and wellness grant so people can afford apps such as Headspace, which I use for mental health and meditation, or maybe so they can participate in local socially distanced fitness offerings, and so forth. There are other ways that logistic access manifests, but those are just some quick examples. The second question, which may be a little bit harder, is do I have access to my academic community in a way that supports my growth as a student and a young professional? And this is harder because you can't perfectly replicate in-person learning, and you may not want to try because it sort of seems like an impossible task, as we discussed during our winter course. Instead, you have to be creative with making people feel as though they're connected to an institution, some of whom have never even set foot on campus at all. And I've seen an example of the second issue playing out in recent conversations I've had with other 1Ls who are trying to imagine themselves in leadership positions on campus next year. Many friends have described feeling unsure of where they fit on campus, unsure of how to create positive impact in organizations they're part of, and generally not knowing much about the institution or what it has to offer generally. For a group of highly motivated people, this almost feels like a delayed start caused by feelings of isolation to a community that we pour so much energy into every day. And while I think the second question has been more widely felt because we're all virtual, I think it's actually something folks feel even during in-person learning. These people might belong or hold marginalized identities on campus who have struggled to see themselves represented and valued in their respective academic communities. So being virtual only took a once selectively felt isolation and made it unfortunately more widely felt. So in sum, I guess my takeaway from the class that we had and my hope going forward is that this virtual year will increase empathy on campus and campuses more generally for those who often feel left out, less valued, or like they do not have access to their educational space despite being in person or virtual. Thank you.
Isabel, thank you. Thank you for taking this time today and for so seriously addressing the issues in our class. It is great to see all of your faces. I should have said that off the bat when I saw you all. It is a great reminder of the intense and wonderful time that we had together. And Bella, I'm sure the thoughts you've just shared will be ones that we will all take with us. And I certainly share your hope that empathy is one thing, increased empathy is one thing that we all come out of COVID with at Harvard Law School and otherwise. I'll turn next to Madeleine. And Madeleine, you, of course, I had particular empathy for you because you were taking this class from Hong Kong. We heard about the students having to be so up at such crazy hours, and the fact that you were managed this class nearly the middle of the night. I'm super grateful to you, and it was great that you also made effort to be at office hours and everything. Really an amazing thing, and a reminder of the particular challenges that different people faced through this year. So thank you for that, and thank you for being here today. Over to you.
Thank you, Professor Palfrey, for asking us to participate in this event. Hi, everyone, I'm Madeleine, and as Professor Palfrey mentioned, I was one of the students who took technology in the public interest over J-term. Looking back on the course, I'm grateful to have been able to make sense of a wide range of issues associated with technology and all their complexity, and to think critically about their effects in shaping the digital environment we all now share. As we discussed in class, so many crucial questions surrounding technology and innovation are in flux, and many of our existing mechanisms and institutions are struggling to respond adequately to ensure that digital technologies benefit everyone. For all of J-term, as Professor Palfrey just mentioned, I was home in Hong Kong, where I'd log on to Canvas and attend our class from 11 p.m. to 1:30 a.m. The experience made me deeply empathetic to the particular strains and the difficulties international students face as we attend virtual class at HLS from all over the world at all hours of the day and night. It also prompted me to think about how technologies both negate and amplify inequalities generally, and what that means as we continue to live with the uncertainties of the pandemic. One of the most memorable moments of the course for me was our impromptu discussion about the insurrection. The shocking events at the Capitol sharpened the fact that our digital society is inseparable from our physical society, and that the choices we make in shaping our online world have profound consequences. The insurrection is emblematic of the larger problems we face, including the role of online platforms such as Twitter in regulating speech, and the dire results of ignoring disinformation and incitements to violence. Our conversations, though upsetting, also felt deeply humanizing in a year that has at times felt removed from the realities of the outside world. I appreciated that as students, we were able to share our reactions and perspectives and to offer consolation and support to one another just as people. This experience has been consistent with others I've had in this year of remote learning. I've been surprised by how many connections I've been able to make virtually, but I've also craved the hard to beat in-person interactions and socializing that I know is such a big part of 1L. Despite the physical distance, I've been amazed at the communities I've been able to discover and feel a part of this year. I've been regularly inspired by my classmates' generosity, wisdom, and willingness to offer help. Together, we've weathered almost a year of online law school, an election, and a catastrophic storm in Texas, just to mention a few of the challenges we've faced on top of the pandemic. Overall, this class and this year have motivated me to think about how important lawyers are and will be in acting as stewards and advocates for change in all the spaces we inhabit, digitally or physically. Because the impacts of technology are bound to only increase in our lifetime, we have a particular responsibility to ensure that technologies are developed and deployed in the service of equity and inclusion. I'm looking forward to continuing these important conversations throughout my time at HLS and hopefully in person with all of you this fall. Thank you.
Madeleine, so good. Thank you. And thank you for putting so many things into context with those remarks. I am very excited for you to be able to be on campus and of course to have your background of, looks like a bit of Langdale behind you. It looks like you almost are, but the real thing is even better, I can assure you. And it will be great for you all to have a version of 1L year together. I can imagine only the hugs that you might have and so forth. In my current job, it's a complicated situation where I've actually never met one of the directors, one of the trustees who's my boss, and we're now 2 years into the time. It just turns out by virtue of meetings and virtual things. And I've been told that this person is a good deal shorter than I am, but I had no idea that that was true, right? Because I've only ever seen kind of their face and how, what's it gonna look like when you first give someone a hug or a fist bump or whatever you do when you've actually never seen them. I look forward on your behalf to that. After Jess, I may come back, Madeleine, to a question about the legal profession, which you just teed up. But thank you for that. And Jess, you come to this course as someone who's already taught at the university level. You have deep engagement both as a student and as a teacher. And it was so fun to have those perspectives active in the class. Let me turn it over to you for the last student response.
Thank you, Professor Palfrey, and thanks everyone for joining us today. It's amazing to have an opportunity to reflect on the last year. As Bella and Madeleine have mentioned, the last year has been a roller coaster of emotions for, I think, all of us. As it relates to becoming a 1L in the middle of this pandemic, I think we all share that particular experience, that it's brought us closer together and also highlighted the differences among us. And for me, when I found out that the fall semester would be 100% remote, as a daughter and wife, part of me felt relieved because I had many fears about my health and being away from my family when our communities were experiencing an insurmountable loss and grief. The Southern Californian part of me, however, also felt sad because I was looking forward to experiencing the change of seasons on the East Coast, and the higher education researcher part of me worried about how this experience would affect my educational experience. In a moment when we all needed hope and reassurance, I put off my worries and I focused on the silver linings. To this day, my Zoom intro goes a little like this. Hi all, my name is Jess. My pronouns are they, them, she, her, and ella. I'm zooming in from Sacramento, California. I was born in Mexico, came to the US when I was 7, and grew up in Southern California. Now I'm in Northern California because my wife is also a 1L, and they're at UC Davis. The pandemic offered us the silver lining of being together this first year of law school, so I'm up early and I work well past the time any of y'all on the East Coast call it a night. That's how all of our classes kind of started out, and we had to repeat that over and over as we met folks in breakout rooms or introduced ourselves in classes for the first time. And throughout the school year, I witnessed the power of community and some of the topics that we discussed in Professor Palfrey's class come to life. During the first month of school, I connected to class from coffee shops, shopping center parking lots, and my phone's hotspot. During finals, when my household and I had COVID, we relied on telehealth apps and delivery services. I tried to focus on performing well academically, even as we were witnessing the world continuing to perish and divide around us. Even as the new administration had taken charge, we witnessed that children continued to be held in cages, that low priority immigrants continued to be deported and detained. And in class, we discussed how ICE's continued use of location technologies made these situations possible. And while white supremacy was deeply felt in our communities, as we also discussed, this was facilitated and aided in large ways by social media platforms and the ways that they were being regulated. Technology felt during the time that we were engaging in these conversations, and it still feels like a double-edged sword. There are so many lessons that I think we can take away from this pandemic, as Bella and Madeleine have also highlighted. I think we can anticipate that working from home will be more widely accepted, and hopefully fewer people will disagree with the idea that access to the internet is a universal right, as Professor Palfrey also mentioned earlier. I witnessed the power of community as families and cities looked out for the less fortunate. And as my classmates also stepped up to offer class notes and supports, as Madeleine mentioned, whenever someone in our section was facing a challenge. Unfortunately, many institutions have yet to shift the way that they interact with individuals. Some institutions of higher education erred on the side of caution as they implemented invasive testing technologies that recorded students as they took exams. Others failed to make accommodations for students who did not have access to the internet. HLS faced its own tensions and still does, as students advocate for recording of lectures, a suspension on low passes, and tuition reductions, to name a few. Balancing the institution's interests of ensuring academic honesty has become very difficult when the technology-based solutions that they select signal to the students that either the institution doesn't trust them or their experience is less than a priority. When the institution's interest is in preserving a grade system at the expense of underprivileged students' mental health, or when an institution's bottom line is more important than an underprivileged student's carefully balanced budget in the midst of a pandemic that disproportionately affects poor people and people of color, we see that all of these challenges are compounded by other issues that already plague higher education in the form of microaggressions and presumed incompetence. And as we move forward, some of the reflections that I took away from our discussions in this course was that our country really needs a space for healing. In many ways, we did that in the course as we held space for one another. And it led me to reflect that in order to collectively heal, we all have to work on ourselves and understand our social position through an intersectional and a critical lens. The changes that we wish to implement have to center those who are disproportionately impacted or are at the margins. And we need sustainable solutions that will protect women, LGBTQ people, children from negative impacts of the new digital era. To craft these solutions, we need people who are aware of their social position, and we need a culture that shifts from a highly individualistic and competitive mindset to one that is more open to collaboration and accountability. So we can't just sprinkle in diversity and expect magic to happen. We need to nurture that emotional intelligence in today's youth and value that and value those skills over a performance on a standardized test or a grade and a more traditional, what we consider traditional forms of assessment. And it feels like this pandemic might have exposed us just to some of that. And hopefully it's something that we can keep up and we can continue to implement so that we can be the change that our world needs right now.
Yes, thank you. Just fabulous. And I'm totally convinced that you have that emotional intelligence, and all of you do, to make exactly that difference as you step into leadership roles. I know we have a couple questions queued up, but I'm just going to start with one, if I might, and you don't all three have to answer it, but if any of you have a thought on it. One thing we spent a bunch of time on was talking about the role that you will have as lawyers as you step out of the legal academy, out of the legal academy into roles in the world outside of HLS. And I wonder if during the course of the term or this year, you've changed your mind at all. Has anything shifted, or are you pretty much where you were when you stepped into law school as you think about where you might head after this? And not putting anybody on the spot to say what you will do necessarily, but have you changed your perspective at all?
I can hop in really quickly. So I came in knowing I wanted to do tech related things. So I very quickly got involved with Berkman. I took and signed up for a reading group that focused tech. Your class, Professor Palfrey, I'm now in Professors at Train's class as my spring elective. But in addition to that, I also very quickly got involved with the Tenant Advocacy Project, which gives direct service and support to folks who are in public housing or using Section 8. And I think as I was involved with this throughout the year, it became very clear to me that where I could find ways to connect tech related issues to whatever the local community that I'm a part of, wherever that is possible, I really want to prioritize that. And I think that really rooting sort of these conversations about access to technology in ongoing conversations about access to housing, access to food security, access to education. I think that sort of merging that and making it less conceptual but more concrete is extremely important. But I would love to hear if Madeleine and Jess have anything to offer as well.
Isabel, one thing I'll say about your response is one of the difficulties of the work we do at MacArthur Foundation is that anything we hone in on, we then realize how intersectional it is and how many things it connects to. So if you're, let's take criminal justice reform for a second, if you're working on, as we are, reducing the average daily jail population and the racial and ethnic disparities, you realize how quickly it's a housing issue, it's an education issue, it's a health issue, like all of those things hit immediately. So your experience with the tenant advocacy piece connecting through to some of these, digital information issues, they are interconnected. And I think one of the things that Charlie Nesson always used to put on the table is everything connects to everything. And that is true. And it's actually a real challenge to parse out. But I know we have some other questions, but Jess or Madeleine, if you care to respond, I see Jess opening her mic, so go to you.
Sure. I was going to speak about that interconnectedness. I think it's something that I knew coming into law school, that solutions needed to be approached, that we needed to approach solutions from an interdisciplinary methodology. And upon being exposed to the issues related to technology, I think it solidified my understanding of this interconnectedness across issues, across problems, but also across people. And something that law school has definitely reinforced for me is the need to expand access to underserved or underrepresented folks in these fields. I'm talking about women in STEM in particular. I'm talking about first gen folks in the legal profession across the board. But I think something that our class really helped me see was also holding space for these courageous conversations is just as important. So we can't simply be diverse attorneys. We have to shift the way that the legal profession is operating so that diversity can be a culture rather than a metric. And I think that calls for a lot of reflection on the part of folks who have been privileged within this profession to ask themselves, can I work in a diverse team? How can I support women of color who are working with me? How can I be mindful of the microaggressions that I may be engaging in that I'm unaware of? How can I increase my mindfulness and be inclusive and supportive and collaborative. And so I think those questions are also aided by technology. We are seeing a lot more social media platforms engage people in those discussions, and a lot more access to like critical consciousness trainings and that sort of thing. So I think the future is looking good. I think it necessitates like bringing just a little bit more of awareness across the board for all of us to know how to work together.
I think so too, and I saw that with our term. Madeleine?
Sorry, I just wanted to jump in and add that I think personally, I think this year has underscored that ultimately technologies have very human impact. And I think we all know that now that it's been over a year of living with COVID. But I think that for me, this year has been a real learning experience in terms of seeing all the very real gaps in technology and access to the services technology provides. And I think I'm still trying to figure out what exactly my role as a future lawyer will be in that space. But I think one of the best parts of our class is that with all our guest speakers, I think it's clear that whether it's activism or scholarship or public interest legal work or working in the private sector, that there are all sorts of ways to support this sort of systemic change, and that nothing is predetermined, and that we all have a role in shaping these technologies as they're being developed.
I'm so glad that came through, Madeleine, because I think in two ways it's really important. One is, I think what's distinctive about this era is you can do so many different things using technology. There is real agency and power in being able to shape a system as it emerges, and that is true as you will graduate in 2023, just as it was in 2001. In my case, it's still happening and emergent. And second, I think that this idea that there's just one path for public interest coming out of law school, or there's one path in terms of big law firms, it's just not true, right? And as you see the careers of people that we met with, almost nobody had exactly that linear path that maybe we all assume is what you need to do coming out of law school. And I think the Klinskys are examples of that too, and so are the deans on here and so forth. So I think there's so many great opportunities, and I'm excited for you and for the world that you will be navigating them soon. Catherine Claypoole, you may have a couple of questions in the queue before we turn to Professor Minow. I don't know if there's one that you want to raise up.
Sure, I do. And first, thank you, Professor Palfrey and Isabella, Jess, and Madeleine for this terrific discussion. So a question is asked by our audience: to what degree is your support for political regulation or censorship of political speech tied to the degree of market power that a company might have? For example, if Twitter was the only effective form of speech distribution, would you allow an individual to censor somebody and all other, for example, Jack Dorsey to individually decide to censor President Biden and all Democrats forever? Or would you say he has usurped the public square pursuant to the Marsh v. Alabama doctrine?
That's such a good question. And of course, there's a ton to unpack there, and it's a lot in how you frame the question, how you respond to it. But, I think that is the problem with allowing these big technology companies to squelch the speech of an unpopular president, in the case of President Trump, on that set of topics, which I think does have to happen. But the reason that you fear doing that is because what if it happens when it's cracking down on speech that you happen to like? And that, of course, is core to the problem of the free speech debate. I think there's something different about taking somebody offline or canceling or taking offline a tweet that happens to incite insurrection or that spreads misinformation in the context of an election, things that actually go to the core of the democratic system. I think that's different than saying, I don't like this speech and I can take it offline. I do think that one of the tricks here, of course, is the state action doctrine that doesn't kick in the sense that these are private platforms. They are, and the question I think asks a very good question about the relative power of a large platform versus a smaller one. But I think the reason that Jack Dorsey was able to do this in this case was not only because he had some good reasons for taking the then president offline or shutting down the account and certain tweets, but also because that the law does allow it right now. I think what we will see in the case of the company town type cases and so forth, so Marsh v. Alabama and Pruneyard and all those cases that we do in constitutional law, I think they will certainly keep coming back, and we will keep looking at those questions about at what point are those platforms so big and so powerful that they represent something that is akin to the public square. And of course, my answer is we ought to have digital public infrastructure in as at least one part of this equation. And I think that diversity is going to help lessen the difficulties of these questions. I also go to the arguments that we've made. Worskasser and I have written a bunch about interoperability, and I think there's a lot of discussion today about the ability for people to move from one platform to the other, and to maybe mandate some of that interoperability and that data portability, which I think might help some of these questions about too much power being vested in too few platforms, but that might take too long to explain.
Thank you. Another question, and following up on your comments and some of our students' comments, how can the internet be used to make education more affordable and accessible with credited or degree granting offerings, while also fostering the leadership and professional skills and equity and inclusion that are as much a part of the formal curriculum as extracurricular activities?
Well, yeah, I think, as you said, each of the students in their way talked about this question and put it, I think, back to the Harvard Law School and to all institutions that we're a part of to try to figure that out and to say, what are the ways in which we can learn from the experience of this year and the experience of the last few decades to create a different kind of experience, and one that serves more people and is truly inclusive in a different way. I think it comes down to the nature of the leadership and the way that we approach it. And I think it is a time when we're rethinking a lot of our long-held philosophies and introducing different kinds of thought. And I think the challenge for us, honestly, is to be open to a lot of different points of view. And I think that's one of the in this moment, we can't have orthodoxies take hold. We actually do have to think more broadly, including about what's happened in the past and including what we're thinking today. And I think that finding the balance there between genuinely including more voices, listening better, and creating new systems, while also heading in a clear direction toward a more equitable, inclusive society through education is just a central problem, and one we all need to put our shoulders together to figure out how to solve.
Thank you. One last question. How can governments and social media companies work together to combat disinformation campaigns, particularly those coming from sources like Russia or China?
I have some views, but any student want to take this one on with your newfound knowledge or existing knowledge? I don't want to put anybody on the spot, but I think the combination of states and academics and companies is actually quite important to figure out public-private partnerships that will allow for spaces that are more open to genuine speech and to protections. One of the projects that we worked on some time ago at the Berkman Center was bringing together a group of companies to think about things like the Sullivan principles, that were ways of which companies could be able to act in apartheid South Africa, for instance, in a way that was in fact consistent with a philosophy that I think didn't support that regime. And similar questions, I think, have come up repeatedly in this era. And so where there are systems, and China would be a good example, where the rights of minorities are absolutely not upheld, as an example, and that goes far beyond the general sort of speech and privacy concerns. I think that is a place where a combination of states and NGOs and academics and companies coming together, grounded in a philosophy that recognizes the interconnectedness that we all have and the empathy that Jess calls on us to have. I think that there are approaches there, and I think the digital institutions we're creating might well, with the right values, be helpful there. But that's a big and hard question for sure. Professor Minow, I think it comes back to you for the closing.
Wow. Worlds beyond courtrooms, judicial opinions and billable hours. Stephen Maureen Klinsky with vision and generosity, created this opportunity for the law school community to engage with inspiring people who make a genuine difference. And no one could be better than John Palfrey for this purpose. And today, John and your students taken us to the front lines of crucial questions about cyberspace, democracy, education, inequality, justice, civil society, danger, and hope. John took us back to the idealistic and anarchist conception of the internet and to the darker challenges that we see today. The hope continues, especially with the internet's opportunities for education. And here you, John, and the Klinskys have been transformative leaders, building resources that are more crucial in a time of COVID than anyone imagined. But then we come to the events of January 6th, which sadly were not unpredictable. If you were watching Charlottesville, the kidnapping threat against the Michigan governor, the cesspools of hateful and threatening actions and recruitments on the internet, amplified by a communication system without any speed bumps. Some of the posts propelled by the promise of money, tied to eyeballs of viewers who engage in electronic rubbernecking or daring games to be outrageous. You know, it's remarkable to see the Secretary General of the United Nations. We warn that public discourse on social media and elsewhere is weaponized now for political gain against refugees, migrants, dehumanizing minorities, and so-called others. He went on to say, hate is moving into the mainstream, and with each broken norm, the pillars of our common humanity are weakened. So it's in that context that I so appreciate the insights that you all brought today, John, Isabella, Madeleine, and Jess, including that everything connects to everything. Nonetheless, we have to take one step at a time. And if only to sharpen our priorities, I do have a question for each of you. If we only could pick one priority right now of what should change, which of the following three should it be? Make broadband cheap, universal, and stable. Condition Section 230 immunity upon embrace and compliance with transparent and effective rules of moderation, or build a public infrastructure for a public internet. Okay, broadband, make the companies responsible, build a public internet. We have to be resilient and we have to be nimble, as the modification of your well-planned course after January 6th indicates. That is itself an inspiring act, the way you and the class responded quickly and immediately to deal with the real world. And I don't know if there's time, doesn't look like there is, for your answers, but I look forward to them. I give my thanks to you all, to Dean Manning for the foresight in inviting you, to everyone for coming, to the Klinskys in particular, and to the spectacular students. Thank you all for being here.